Thank you very much, Ruth. Ruth is my girl right there. It's funny, I have this saying where I usually don't trust people with two first names, Ruth, John, but she's still my girl still. It's a bad joke, I know. It's funny, I was just looking at the photo of myself on screen, and I'm actually wearing the same shirt, and I have the same watch on, and I actually would have worn the hat that I'm wearing there, but I lost it. So that would have been very strange. Anyhow, good morning. Good morning, Amsterdam. I'm definitely, or good morning, Dom. For the few of you out there who follow me on Twitter, I like to start my days just greeting the Dom for whatever reason. I don't know how that started, but it just became a thing. So you'll see a lot of that from me. But like I said, good morning, Amsterdam. I'm super stoked to be here. It's funny because I kind of came from music, and I had friends of mine who had come through Amsterdam quite often on performances and whatnot, and I used to just kind of dream of being out here. And when I had an opportunity to come out for this time around, I was just like, I absolutely have to go to this one venue because a bunch of my friends performed there. And I don't even know how to pronounce this. If anyone's from Amsterdam here, or there's Dutch, is BIM House, I don't know. Whatever it is, but it's a gorgeous venue. And it's actually not even too far from here. So I plan on walking by, checking it out. But like I said, a lot of my friends have performed there, and I was always super jealous. But I mean, I just did what all sort of like successful musicians do, is quit and make money and become a developer. So yes, my name is Henri, last name is not Helvetica. It's just a non plume I thought would be kind of interesting, but people seem to gravitate towards it and believe it's my last name. But nonetheless, that is my Twitter handle. That's my Instagram handle if you want to see me do nothing on Instagram. But I'm from the greatest city on the planet, a city called Toronto. I love it there. It's super multicultural. Like Ruth said, I tend to sort of like work in the performance space. Also run a couple meetups. One is the performance meetup. One is another one recently I started just out of interest, which is the Jamstack one. And as you could tell, I'm a professional bodybuilder. That's what I do in my spare time. But all jokes aside, I do actually partake in some activities, and I like to run. And in fact, one of my sheroes is Sifan Hassan, who's actually a Dutch resident. She just recently ran the 10,000 meter championship and won. So I was pretty stoked. But I'm a big fan of hers. And in fact, I got to meet her for the first time this summer. And this was in California, but I'm keeping with like European rules because GDPR, the whole right to be forgotten kind of thing. Is that how it goes? Yeah. That is not me, apparently. Nonetheless, I'm here at ViewSource. To the ViewSource people, thank you very much for having me for the second time. I loved it the first time around. It was a fantastic experience, so I want to thank you for having me this time around as well. And we're going to talk about what I believe is a pretty safe statement, or correct one. The web is in a great place. Some of you may have some disagreements potentially, but I'm going to tell you why I believe it is what it is right now. So let's talk about the web. Webs have been around 30 years. We more or less know that. But do you know what you were doing about 30 years ago? Maybe some of you may not have been around. Some of you were just super young, like myself. But 30 years ago, this band right here put out their greatest record anyways. This is Motley Crue, and they put out a record 30 years ago called Dr. Feelgood. Their greatest accomplishment anyhow. 30 years ago, we also had this great cartoon. Can't believe it's been 30 years in change. But on record, it's one of the greatest around. And we had one of the greatest disappointments in music history right here. Milli Vanilli, we all know what happened. If you didn't, it's a bit of a sad story, but you know, it was the greatest ruse, what I'll say. But 30 years ago, around there, some people were starting to get on the web. And shortly after that, I did. And I went out and got one of these things, which is obviously a modem. It allowed me to do things like this, go to news groups. And news groups, for those who don't know, that's what I consider sort of like the original social network. You're hanging out with people you didn't know, and you're like, oh, dude, I'll totally trade you mixtapes or whatever. And you actually did that. I also did things like this. I went to Alta Vista, which was my preferred search engine. Shout out to all the people from the Big G that I know who are in the building. And I also did this. I used Netscape Navigator. And it was one of the first browsers I was introduced to, but it did everything I needed it to do, and I loved it. Side note, I go to California every so often. I have some family out there. I was super stoked one day, and I went and drove to the original offices of Netscape, and I just sat in front of the address and took a photo. I don't know why, but I thought it was so cool. Nonetheless, and that's 650 Castro, Mountain View, California. I like them so much, this is my avatar right now. So if you ever see this, you're like, I don't know if that's him really, I don't see a face. That actually is me. But when Netscape was released, this statement was made. The software is going to change everything. I mean, you probably had a decent idea that I was going to do something all right, but to further things, the original PM on Java, Kim Polisi, added this statement. Things started exploding with the invention of the browser because suddenly the internet was accessible to the average person. And that was more or less correct, because your average middle-class person was getting a modem, buying a dumpy computer, may have had one already, and was able to access the net at the time. And what happened was we had 65 million users in 18 months. That was an adoption rate that I'd never been seen before, so much so that the people at Microsoft were like clutching their pearls and just like, what's going on here? But fast forward to today, we have 4.5 billion users online. That's just over, in and around 55%. And you might think like, man, that's like a large number, like what's going on? How are things progressing so quickly that so many people would be online? Now, there's a lot of things in business that happen that are kind of like happy accidents or things you just could not predict that go extremely well, like Velcro, like Viagra. Ooh. But one thing that no one predicted was this, the mobile phone. No one realized that first, it was going to be created. Second, it was going to be as powerful as it is. As some people have said before, some of these phones are more powerful than the technology that took people to space. And that's really important because that also drove the adoption. And the adoption, it was so strong that you had moments like these. And this is one picture that I actually love talking about because you're talking about a community that generally has shunned all things technology. It's like manual, mowing the lawn. It's like, but somehow they have a smartphone. This is another powerful picture that I like to sort of parade around. Now think about this. You're talking about remote locations, you're talking about suspect connectivity, but they're actually on a phone. Now, it might not be a smartphone, it might be a feature phone, but they're actually on a phone. And they have access to the internet. And like I said, it might be a feature phone because we've seen a little bit of resurgence in that area of sort of like devices. And in fact, whoops, does this work? All right, this is a quote that I lifted from an interview with Mike Taylor where he talks about, and I think he's in the room somewhere, still a lot of feature phones out there in the market. Tons of people are using these phones right now. And this is absolutely correct. You're talking about areas of the globe where these moderate to low power devices are the ones that people are picking up due to price points. These things are very important, but they're actually able to get on the net. So what are we doing with some of these phones, whether it be feature, but especially with the smartphones? What can we do today in 2019? Well, we can do a lot of different things. Whoops, pardon me. Like, we might go on a date. Online dating is big. I've never partaken, but I hear it is. And, to go on this date, we might get dressed up. So we'll go online shopping. Then we'll go rent a car to go on this date, here a Chevy Impala. We might listen to Tame Impala through our mobile device while we're on this date. and will go ahead and order Uber Eats online and eat empanadas. See what I did there? But there's so much more you can do. And what I want to do in the next little bit, we're going to talk about what I feel is the shape of the web. The technology, the technologists that are going to be involved in making things a little better along the way. So one thing I like to talk about and how important this is collaboration. Collaboration is key in a lot of different industries, and it absolutely will be in the web, for sure. We have front-end developers, that's for sure. Any back-end developers in the room? Not that I can see. All right. Be proud, throw that hand up. We obviously have designers. Designers are important in this process. We have user experience professionals. We also have author experience people. This is something that I picked up a couple weeks ago. I was at a conference, and someone mentioned author experience. I'm like, what is that? But the CMS developers talk about the author experience because they need to create tools for the authors who are then also releasing product out there for users in the end. So at the end of the day, all of these people work together to create a proper developer experience, then in the end, that comes out as a good product for the user. I think it's actually dope. I think it's an amazing process. And again, for short, I'm just going to call it dope. But speaking of dope, let's talk about dope. Who's heard of a language here called dope? All right, I didn't think so. It was a failed language, but it was a language nonetheless. It stood for Dartmouth Oversimplified Programming Experiment. Like I said, a failed language, and it was released by this gentleman right here. His name is John Kemeny, Hungarian mathematician, was a professor at the University of Dartmouth. He believed that he could put a team of STEM and non-STEM people together with the goal of getting non-STEM students to get into programming. And he felt that this could definitely happen because DOPE, the language, was something that he was basically working on that was going to do that, get non-STEM types into programming. So he had these teams work together, collaborate, and eventually they released another version of the program, or the programming language, and that was called BASIC. Who here has heard of BASIC or used BASIC? All right, that's what I'm talking about. BASIC, I consider a success. BASIC was a collaborative effort. And as you know, it became the big language that it was. It was seen as what many will now call an aligned team, and this is a quote from his daughter. It was a successful project as a collaborative effort. I mentioned the meetups. Why? Because, I mean, most of us probably attend meetups at some point. I believe that the best meetups out there, because some meetups are poorly attended, some, moderately, the best meetups are going to be the collaborative efforts. I may have a speaker who deals in mobile, but he also deals, in React Native. And I may reach out to the React meetup and say, hey, let's come together and create a better meetup for the developers so that they can all sort of take something back. Again, the collaborative effort with a success at the end. That is going to be the shape of the web. I like to talk about respect as well. Having respect for developers. Imagine that. How about we talk about things like documentation, writing proper documentation. Who here has had to read some wacky docs in the past? Yeah, I thought so. I'm just going to leave this one up here. You have good docs, people will talk about them. People talk about your good docs, people will start reading them. So next year, I've been invited to a conference. It's going to be in Atlanta. And can someone tell me what the date of the conference is going to be? Yeah, I thought so. A developer said that the main problem is when the whole interface doesn't work very well with your culture. And he was talking about specifically dealing with countries outside of North America, or like the English-speaking countries. And we're talking about specifically I-18N, what most will call internationalization. How important is that? Well, je sais pas, si je parlais français un peu, et puis j'avais des documents qui paraissaient pas trop mal, mais écoute, je parle pas anglais, alors qu'est-ce que je vais faire? Who understood that? A few of you, but the majority didn't. Now imagine that. Imagine getting some documentation that just looks like Lord Ipsum. You're just going to drop that. This is a quote that I lifted off a Microsoft site, one of the many pages that they have, but it hit the nail. With the growing software market far beyond the English-speaking language, English-speaking world, it's important for the software to support various text data formats to reach all the potential customers. But, I mean, it's a language thing at the end of the day. Wes Boss, a couple weeks ago, released a bunch of information about some of the people who were picking up on his courses and et cetera, and he was stunned at the amount of users he had beyond the English-speaking nations. And he shared it online. It was very insightful. Here he's talking about having some of the users in Africa. And then he released some additional data here. And if you look at the top 25, you know, you could count the native English-speaking countries on one and a half hands. Maybe two, sorry. Now, I get back to this photo again. This is why I like to circulate this photo. Think about what is happening beyond our shores. Now, let's look at the number of internet users across the globe. So, number 1, China, through number 10, Mexico. USA's in there. Where are the English-speaking countries? Let's look at the greatest growth, Egypt through India. Where are the English-speaking countries? Now, I'll tell you this much. For all the Spanish-speaking countries, GitHub is ready. They recently announced they have some documentation entirely in Spanish, ready for these territories, ready for these new developers. Let's talk about internationalization in real life. On my way here yesterday, ran into a developer from Toronto. I think he's somewhere in the room here. And he talked about growing up and playing around with computers and playing around with a bit of programming. But around his area, he was the only one he was able to. Why was that? He was taking some English classes because he had a tutor. So he was the only one in a group of kids who were all interested in software or programming or maybe, you know, playing around with BASIC back then. But he was the only one who knew what to do because he had a tutor and he was learning English at the time. I think that's totally wild. And before I get into this point right here, I want to talk about the fact that, and this is something that I believe Bruce Lawson had said. He talks about, where's your next user coming from? I'll go a step further and say, where's your next developer coming from? That's why the documentation is important. Proper documentation, proper translation, that's going to be the future, the shape of the web. So let's talk about developer diversity. And I know what you're thinking right now, but it goes beyond that. I mean, I'll start with this. Women in technology, we know what. You know, we have to celebrate wins. You know, do not go out and necessarily, you know, question their accomplishments like, yo, that was actually pretty cool. You know, you want to test their acumen somehow. It's like, no, man, they did it. They know how to program. Celebrate wins. You know, and I'm going to touch on this very quickly. Shout outs to Tejas, who kind of reminded me about this. But I've spoken about this before. Yes, I do hang out in the performance circles, so I know who this is. Hands up if you know the name Lena. Okay, a few of you do. But if you hang out in performance, we talk about images, we talk about image processing, we talk about compression. Somehow, this is the photo that became the standard photo for that kind of research. Oh, you might think it's totally cool. All right. Well, this is Lena when she was in her 20s. She's like a retired person now. But this picture was picked up on a whim one day. You know, someone was going to do a presentation, was kind of sick and tired of looking at the same photos he had all the time, so he grabbed a magazine and he was like, flip, 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 flip. Oh, I'm going to use this. Well, you may think that, nah, it's pretty innocent. Well, it kind of was, until you found out that it came from a Playboy 40 years ago. But somehow it remained the standard image unofficially. So much so that people start to ridicule the idea that a centerfold just remained, a centerfold from the 70s remained the standard the photo. And I argued a few years ago that this photo should just be retired, because you're talking about 2 million photos, 2 billion photos are uploaded to the net every day, but somehow you still want to use a Playboy centerfold. I don't think these are kind of things that really are respectful of the people that we work with. Let's talk about cultural diversity. I mean, I'm from Toronto, I'm Canadian. Canada's going through a little bit of situation right now with our Prime Minister. You know, in his younger days, he was wilding out. But these are important. These moments are important. Respecting the cultural diversity of your team. And they talk about, oh man, you're gonna have such an advantage by having like a cultural, a culturally sort of like diverse a team of developers. Well, how about just being like a cool person first? Let's talk about language diversity. And I'm specifically talking about things like CSS versus JS and the ongoing battles that are going on there, which I think are hilarious. But specifically, I think the way some developers kind of malign CSS, thinking like, oh no, that's no big deal. That's just CSS. And I love this, this quote from Rachel Andrew. I'm not even sure if she's here, but she's due to be here around this weekend, I think. CSS is too trivial for real developers to worry about, yet too difficult for them to understand. How about we just have respect for everyone and their specialties? You're good at JS? That's awesome. You're fantastic at CSS? Great. You have a knack for HTML? Fantastic. I remember Chris Corey used to say he felt that there was room for to employ someone who was just absolutely brilliant in CSS. Think about how complicated CSS has become these days. And complicated not in like in a bad way, but just it's fantastic the way CSS has evolved and the things that you can do with it. Let's start respecting the people who sort of like, you know, are skilled in that craft. And respecting these people is the shape of the web. Browser diversity. That's going to be a good one. You know, we got the heavyweights here today. You know, I know Samsung's here, shout out. Google, Microsoft came through with the troops. I saw them downstairs. Shout outs to Safari, who's not here, WebKit. I shot them a little email, you know, they're caught up. It's all good. But I know Mike Taylor again, I think he's here, but I believe he's going to talk about this throughout the 2 days. But browser diversity is important. And you know what, long before, or maybe not long before, but right around the time, you know, there was like a browser war, or the first one, as you want to call it, there was another war going on. Bam! Oh, yeah. I know a few of you are like, yo, I remember this one. VHS versus Betamax. And, you know, unfortunately, VHS won out the battle, even though a lot of people believe that Betamax was a better product. Hopefully, we won't end up with just like, you know, all of us using UC browser or something of the sort. But browser diversity is important. We're going to hear from some people. We're going to talk about it. Making sure that we have a diverse set of browsers is going to be the shape of the web. Also, open source. Super important. Any WordPress developers in the building, don't be shy. Throw your hands up. Okay, we got love for you. Even though your days are numbered. I'm just playing. But you run about 35% of the web. Who worked on jQuery here? Don't be shy, we got love for you too. Just celebrated 13 years recently. #1 framework out there right now to this day. Obviously, some antiquated work, but it's out there and it's there. And obviously, React is out there. Yeah, I know, React. But guess what? They're all open source. But also, hey, thank you for having me. Oh, all right. I mean, they're doing God's work. Let's go. Specifically, it is the act of collaboration across an open platform which is essential to individual growth and the collective future. The collective future. Out of the 12,000 contributors to Firefox, just about 750,000 contributions. Sorry, I'm French, so I get the accents wrong sometimes. But just under 10% were code. So what does that mean? We have a collaborative team of people building a product. Not all developers, not all designers. I mean, I can get into the weeds as to, who did what, but these are important moments. And moments like these are the shape of the web. Now, believe it or not, I'm going to speed through this deck. Performance is going to be important. I mean, we're going to hear about it. I know there are a couple talks going on. There's some tooling talks. And there's a talk, Is It Fast Yet? I believe it's called. Speed is important. Speed is important because you're going to be working in these territories where connectivity is kind of suspect. Outside of the G7s. Connectivity is not gangster. We're going to get into things where we demand fast responses. All these acronyms like TTFB, FCP, LCP. That's a new one. Things like the speed index. All these performance APIs. And I think the best thing right now about, browsers specifically, is that the new APIs, the adoption across the clients is getting faster and faster. Once upon a time, it'd be a particular client who's like, yo, we're going to do this. And then like 8 months later, others were like, okay, we're going to come aboard. But now that time is reducing. So all users are having a better experience. I mean, I like to talk about image formats all the time. I mean, these things are being researched as we speak today. There's a format they're talking about called the JPEG XL. Just when you thought the JPEG had seen all its variants, but we have a new one being worked on. Again, it's called the JPEG XL. And I'm sure everyone's heard, well, a few of you have heard about the WebP. Yes, hands up, maybe, maybe not. Supported by Firefox, supported obviously by Chrome. By the way, the WebP turns 9 today, I believe. I'll have to double check, but I believe it's its anniversary today. These are important moments in the future of the web, the shape of the web, because we want to make sure that the web is as fluid and smooth as possible. And image formats, performance are going to be part of that solution. A lot of people are using Lighthouse these days, which is fantastic, because you're talking about a product that has seen some great adoption, despite the fact that we've been sort of beating the performance drum for a while, but people are now going around saying, hey, my Lighthouse score is this, my Lighthouse score is that. That's fantastic. Did you know that the median Lighthouse score on the web is 41? Yeah, there's work to do. Hello. So, like I said, there's going to be some tooling talks during the 2 days here. You'll be able to, I think there might be one today, in fact, but you'll have to double check the schedule. And of course, it'd be tough for me to not mention, at the very least, privacy, because that's obviously top of mind these days. I know I was having this conversation with Vitaly about it, and the fact that there's a challenge with privacy right now, I think, again, is a bit of a testament to the success of the web, in a sense that the challenges we're having with privacy are only happening because the web is fully here, it is fully established. Now we just have to wrangle the challenges of tracking and all that. So, that leaves us with these two words, the web. Are we in a good place? Again, I argue that we are, and I'll tell you why. Despite the fact that, and I love this quote because it came from like I was watching the news, and oh, what's her name? She was like a political candidate, but the dark psychic forces of privacy, yes, they're here, absolutely, and it's tough. But we're going to hear about it again this week. Well, I was going to say this weekend, sorry. This week. I mean, we have speakers like Diane Hausfeld and Ryan Kropp and Wendy Seltzer who are going to talk about privacy. But it is kind of weird, actually. And I'll share a quick story. Last year at the ViewSource, in fact, I was having a side conversation about, there was once upon a time, there was a company that sold like rubber boots and tires. They're called Nokia, and they also sold phones. But we talked about this super old phone that they had called the Virtue, and it's like blah, 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 it's super expensive. And, you know, I never knew anyone else who knew about it, no big deal. Like 3 or 4 days later, it popped up in my feed somewhere. A phone that was like antiquated, that was nowhere near the market anymore, but somehow it showed up on my feed, and I was just like, yo, man, this privacy stuff, this tracking stuff is absolutely bananas. But we're going to talk about it, and like I said, the next few days, and we'll be able to figure out what we can do. And one of the few semi-blemishes of the web. So when it comes to sort of like measuring the successes of the web, I'd like to quote a gentleman by the name of Jason Lengstroff, who used to work at Gatsby, he has this great program called Learning with Jason right now. And I love this quote. If you want to talk metrics, he wants to say community as a primary metric is what you should be looking at. And I think it's absolutely true. If you have engagement with your product, that's the community responding. That's a fantastic way to gauge what's happening. You have fantastic framework adoption. That's the community responding. Why? Because you may have had proper translation. So people in other countries were able to sort of like pick up on it and adopt this framework faster than they would have prior. You get people bragging about their Lighthouse score. Again, that's community responding because somehow you've been able to create these conditions that they can sort of like work with the tooling, get the results they want, and go out and get on Twitter and say their things. So that being said, I think the web is absolutely in a great shape. The fact that my parents, my dad especially, can get online and brag about how he updated his insurance, or he bought his ticket for this 60-day trip he's going on with my mom, you know, across the world. The idea that, you know, across 2 days here in Amsterdam, we're going to have a multitude of DevRels. We're going to have PMs all here talking about all things web. I think that's fantastic. I know we're going to have, there's going to be a talk about, I believe, AR. And I remember thinking about AR like, oh yeah, I remember that. And again, I came from music. I remember holding up a CD in front of my laptop camera one day, and out of nowhere, these exclusive music files showed up on my desktop. I was like, what the hell just happened here? And I'm thinking to myself, like, man, the technology involved with Voodoo these days is amazing. But I was wrong. That was the web at work. So that being said, I think we're all going to be here. We're going to have an amazing 2 days. I'm really looking forward to having conversations with, like I said, some of the Edge people in the building. I know some Google people in the building. I know some Samsung people in the building, and everything in between. I think the next 2 days we may get some decisions that, you know, some products may come out of it 2 months from now, 6 months from now. It may come out next year. But I know the people here, all of us, we're going to be here building better products, building much better products for users in the end. And in the end, we are going to create better conditions and what I like to call a better shape of the web. So thank you very much, and have yourself a ball.